Okay, so today we're going deep on a case that is really interesting.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I think this is one of those things that, everybody's going to have an opinion about.
Right.
And it kind of gets at, you know,
It's a good one.
it's a good one.
Yeah.
It gets at kind of like the whole idea, like, when does something cross the line from being just like, you know,
Hmm.
like a change for clarity in an interview into like misrepresenting somebody?
Exactly.
And this is specifically in the context of like a very like politically charged news environment.
Yeah.
So we're talking.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot more of these types of suits now.
Yeah,
Which is
we are. And in fact, this one is a pretty high profile lawsuit that we're going to be looking at today, involving former President Trump.
yes,
So he's suing CBS for $10 billion.
$10 billion.
$10 billion with a B.
Wow.
Um, and he's saying that a 60 Minutes interview that they did with Kamala Harris back in 2023 was edited to make her look good. And he is saying that this was done to try to influence the outcome of the 2024 election.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, I mean, this whole question of like presenting information accurately versus concisely,
Right.
it's always been a bit of a tension in media,
Right.
especially when we're talking about public figures and elections. I mean, stakes are really high.
Yeah, so let's get into the specifics a little bit more.
Okay.
So Trump is specifically saying that CBS edited this interview with Kamala Harris.
Right.
And it was an interview that they did with her on 60 Minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And he's saying that they edited this interview to make her look good.
Right.
So essentially what they did was...
Like, what was the particular edit in question?
Yeah.
I mean, what are we talking about here specifically?
So they were asking her about the war in Gaza.
Okay.
And apparently her answer to the question was kind of long.
Right.
And somewhat rambling.
Okay.
And they edited it down to a much shorter,
Hmm.
more concise answer that he's saying made her look a lot better.
So basically, he's arguing that the edit made her seem more articulate and decisive
Yes.
than she maybe actually was in the full unedited version.
Exactly.
So it's about perception, really.
Exactly.
It's not necessarily that what she said in the aired version was false. It's that it may not have fully represented the complexity or maybe even the uncertainty of her full response.
Right. And he's saying that that essentially is a form of election interference.
Right. So it is a pretty loaded term.
It is a very loaded term.
When we talk about election interference, we're usually talking about things that, are intended to obstruct or illegally influence the voting process.
Right.
Things like voter suppression, hacking voting machines, these kinds of things.
Yeah, those are all very serious things.
Yeah, this is serious stuff.
So he's basically taking, this idea of editing an interview.
And elevating it to this level of election interference.
Exactly.
Which is...
It's really interesting.
It is very interesting legal strategy. I mean, is he actually arguing that CBS is trying to swing the election in Kamala Harris's favor?
That's essentially what he's saying.
Wow. That's a bold claim.
It is a bold claim.
Yeah.
But it's, it's interesting because
he's essentially saying that the media has that much power, right?
Yes.
That they can actually influence the outcome of an election through how they edit an interview.
Right. And that by choosing to show this shorter, more concise version of her answer, they were essentially giving her a leg up.
Right. They were giving her an advantage.
Right.
They were presenting her in a more favorable light to the voters.
Exactly.
Which could potentially sway their votes.
Right. And so it gets to this question of like, okay, so is editing interviews common practice?
Oh, absolutely.
Right? Like it's standard operating procedure in broadcast media.
Yeah.
Think about it. You've got time constraints.
Right.
You have to create a narrative that flows. You have to make things digestible for the audience.
Right. I mean, nobody wants to watch a 2-hour interview with a politician, right? It has to be edited down to the most essential points.
Right.
And, sometimes that involves, cutting out things that are maybe repetitive or tangents or things that don't really add to the main point.
Right.
So editing is essential. But of course, the question is, where does it become problematic?
Right. And that's what's so interesting about this case.
Right.
Is that, Trump is basically saying that this particular edit crossed the line.
Crossed that line.
From being just, an edit for clarity.
Right.
Into actually misrepresenting her.
Into actually distorting her message.
Exactly.
And potentially, swaying voters.
Yeah. And, CBS is obviously fighting back. They're saying, no, we didn't doctor the interview.
Right.
We just edited it fairly.
They're saying this is standard practice.
Right.
This is what we do.
And, they're saying that the goal was to present the information clearly, but without altering the meaning of her statements.
Right. And they're arguing that the edited version still accurately reflects her position on the issue,
Right.
even if it's not her, complete and unabridged response.
So now we've got a situation where we've got a former president claiming election interference.
Right.
We've got a media giant defending its editing practices.
Yeah.
We've got a $10 billion lawsuit just kind of looming over everything.
It's a big one.
It is.
It's a big one. And, I think the outcome of this lawsuit could have far-reaching implications for
Right.
both media and politics.
Yeah. So
I mean, this could set a precedent for how much leeway media outlets have in editing interviews,
right.
especially interviews with political figures.
So he filed this suit in Amarillo, Texas.
Amarillo, Texas.
And the reason why he filed it there.
And why would he choose Amarillo, Texas?
Yeah. Why Amarillo, Texas?
It's not exactly known for being,
a media hub.
the center of the media universe, right?
Right. So there's a reason.
So the judge who's presiding over this case is Judge Matthew Kaczmarek.
Okay.
And have you heard of him?
And he has a history of ruling.
Because I haven't.
He has a history of ruling favorably on cases that are aligned with right-wing viewpoints.
So this is a strategic move by Trump.
It seems very strategic.
Yeah.
And so,
He's forum shopping, essentially.
yeah,
He's trying to find a court where he thinks he'll get a favorable ruling.
exactly.
And Judge Kaczmarek's record suggests that he might be sympathetic to Trump's arguments.
Exactly.
So, this choice of venue, it's not just a coincidence.
It's not a coincidence. It's part of a bigger strategy.
It's very deliberate.
Yeah. And and this is not the first time that Trump has tried to challenge the media.
Oh, no, not at all. This is a pattern for him.
Remember when he called for ABC to lose its broadcasting license?
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Because they fact-checked him during a debate.
During a debate, yeah, he was not happy about that.
He was not happy.
Yeah.
And
he's very consistent with this kind of rhetoric,
Yes.
attacking the media.
And
Accusing them of bias.
the FCC, which oversees broadcasting, they basically said
They shut that down pretty quickly.
yeah, they were like,
Yeah, they basically said you can't just revoke a license because you don't like the coverage.
right.
That's
not how it works.
not how this works.
And
that's
a slippery slope.
a very slippery slope.
Yeah.
And they basically said, that this is a threat to free speech,
Exactly.
to be able to revoke somebody's license
Right. I mean, that's
just because you don't like what they're saying.
essentially censorship.
Yeah.
Right? You're
Yeah.
trying to silence a media outlet because you don't agree with their reporting.
Exactly.
And the FCC, they're a regulatory body, but they also have a responsibility to protect the First Amendment.
Right.
And they see this kind of action as a direct threat to that,
Right.
to freedom of the press.
So essentially what we have here is we've got this situation where
Mm.
Trump is basically saying that the media is so powerful
That they can influence elections just by the way that they edit an interview.
Right.
And that's a really scary thought.
It is a scary thought if you believe that that's true, because it suggests that, we're not really getting objective information from the media,
right.
that it's all being manipulated to serve some kind of agenda.
Right.
And if that's the case, then how can we trust anything we see or hear?
Right. And so that kind of leads into this question of okay, so what does all of this mean for media freedom?
Yeah.
Like,
What does this mean for journalists?
are we going to be in a world where journalists are constantly worried that they're going to get sued
Right.
every time they
Every time they make an editorial decision.
every time they edit an interview?
Right. I mean, are they going to start second-guessing themselves?
Fair.
Are they going to be afraid to cover controversial topics?
Or to challenge powerful figures?
Or to challenge powerful figures, exactly.
Um,
Because they're worried about the legal repercussions.
Yeah.
And I think that's the real danger here.
Yeah.
It's not just about this one lawsuit.
right.
It's about the chilling effect that it could have on journalism as a whole.
Right.
If journalists start censoring themselves, if they start pulling their punches because they're afraid of being sued,
Right.
then we all lose out.
Yeah, because then how can we trust that we're actually getting the full story?
Exactly. How do we know that we're getting all the information we need to make informed decisions?
Right. And isn't that kind of a threat to democracy?
Absolutely. A free and independent press
Right.
is essential for a healthy democracy.
Right.
It's one of the cornerstones of our system of government.
So what do we do?
Well, that's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
I mean, on the one hand,
Public figures want to be portrayed fairly,
right, they have a right to a fair representation.
but the media needs to be able to present information in a way that's concise and engaging.
Exactly.
So where do we draw the line?
That's the tough part.
Right.
Like, should public figures expect that every single word that they utter is going to be broadcast?
I mean, that's not realistic.
Or is selective editing just like a necessary part of modern media?
I think it is to some extent.
Yeah.
We can't expect every interview to be aired in its entirety.
Right.
It would be impossible.
Yeah.
So I think the key here is transparency.
Okay.
I think media outlets need to be more transparent about their editing processes.
Okay.
You know, maybe they could provide full, unedited interviews online
Okay.
alongside the edited versions
Okay.
so that viewers can compare and contrast.
And make their own judgments
Yeah.
about whether or not the editing was fair.
Right.
Okay.
Or, you know, maybe there could be stricter guidelines for labeling edited content,
Okay.
you know, so that viewers are aware that what they're seeing has been altered.
So it's not just about the content itself, it's about being open about the process.
Exactly.
Okay, so what about regulatory bodies like the FCC?
Right. What role should they play in all of this?
Yeah. I mean, it's a tricky situation
Yeah.
because on the one hand, they have to protect free speech.
Hmm.
But on the other hand, they also have a mandate to ensure responsible broadcasting.
Right.
And, you know, traditionally, their role has been focused on preventing things like obscenity and hate speech.
Mm-hmm.
But with the rise of online media, their jurisdiction is becoming less clear.
Yeah, because how do you regulate content?
Exactly.
That's not technically broadcast.
Right, it's on the internet.
But it's still being widely consumed.
Right, everyone's watching it.
So it's a new challenge for them.
And then how do they navigate situations like this where you have a political figure
Right.
who's essentially trying to use regulatory pressure
Mm-hmm.
to punish a media outlet for coverage that they didn't like?
Yeah, it's like using the FCC as a weapon
Right.
to silence your critics.
So it feels like this is like a whole new frontier for them.
It is a new frontier. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how they adapt
Yeah.
to this changing media landscape. So in the end, it's not really just about what's happening on the screen or in the courtroom.
Right.
It's about all of us and like recognizing the power of information
Mm-hmm.
and our responsibility to be informed and engaged citizens.
Exactly.
And that's something we're thinking about long after this deep dive is over.
I completely agree. I think it's on all of us to be critical consumers of media,
Yeah.
to question our own biases,
Yeah.
to seek out diverse perspectives, and to really, engage in thoughtful dialogue about these issues.
And that's what we try to do here on the deep dive.
That's what we're all about.
So thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Bye. Bye.